Okay, I hope this is working. I just got my laptop back, so that's partly why I'm using my phone right now. The Bluetooth wasn't working, so I see there's at least 3 or 4 of you right now. So this is your chance to ask questions. Let's see if this works. I've never tried this before. You guys are part of the maiden voyage together with me, so if you have any questions, see if you can ask them and get them answered. Okay. I'm going to see if I can try to get this on my laptop instead, so it's less awkward. Okay. Don't think the connection on campus is good enough, so I think on my phone it's probably going to be better. Okay. Okay. So for those who don't know, this is my office. From my perspective, it's small, but it's cozy. I usually don't have the fluorescent lights on because I don't like them, but for TV purposes, I thought I'd turn them on. You need a channel, really? I think you need, I don't know if you need a channel on YouTube, but you definitely need a YouTube account, a Google account, which pretty much everyone has. I had some issues with that, but I tried it last night and I found out a way to get it to work. So let's see if this works. If not, I have another stream on Instagram in about half an hour. I never use Instagram, but I know you guys are very fond of it, so, but I wanted to see if this works first. Okay. Okay. Just going to check my messages, my email. Okay. All right. So I see there's at least 5 or 6 of you online. Okay. All right. So I'm just wondering if anyone can post. I saw someone post a question. So at least one of you out there has the ability. The rest of you, I don't know. Okay. Looks like we have a few lurkers, people who want to see what other people are going to say. So this is my laptop. I just got it back today. I've had it for 4 years, and I've already had to replace the hard drive twice in the last 2 years. So I had 2 hard drive failures in 2 years here. I don't know why. This last failure came out of nowhere. I hope it's the last one, but I'll probably buy a new one this semester anyway. I'm still trying to get the Bluetooth to work on it though, because it's got a new OS. Okay. Huh. All right, looks like there's 7 of you out there. Just looking at a couple of emails I got. Okay. Oh, really? Interesting. Huh. Create a chat. That's very, yeah, at least one of you is signed in but can't post comments. I thought I had a similar issue this afternoon, but last night it worked fine for me. I tested this last night, so I'm not sure what that is or if I have to change a setting somewhere. I thought that if you just had a YouTube account, you can post questions or comments. That's because I've participated. Ah, there we go. Ah, okay, Sharuk. Okay, Sharuk had this problem and she fixed it. So Sharuk, what did you do to fix the problem? I'm sure some other people. You just have to create a channel. Okay. Okay. So even if you don't use a channel on YouTube, if you have an account, you have to create a channel, and that way you can actually participate. Literally just click create channel. Okay. Great. Okay. So I hope you all can see what Sharuk is telling us. If you're logged in and it tells you create a channel, even if you have an account, you still have to technically create a channel. So somewhere you click create a channel and it should work. Okay. All right, so I know there's at least 2 of you who can post comments. MA, whoever that is, seems to have disappeared. But I still see 6 or 7 of you are lurking. After a while, this becomes a little awkward. Ah, Manal, okay. All right. So I know there's 2 of you there. Okay. All right, so I hope whoever is watching can post comments or questions. It's the whole point of this. As much as I'm sure you'd love to see me make a fool of myself. Okay, yeah, thank you, Sharuk. Okay. What passages should we focus on? That is our first relevant question. That's a $1 million question. Without giving too much away, I can't tell you the answer, but I can say if we didn't spend significant time on it in class, a specific passage, I mean, we're probably not going to talk about it. I'm not going to ask you about it, I mean. So I'm not going to ask you about some passage from de Beauvoir that we didn't talk about at great length. I think you can think of some of the passages, or the important statements, I should say, the major statements from some of the theorists we looked at. So, for example, what are the famous or the important quotations and statements we read from Marx? What are the important quotations or statements we read from Saussure? Things like that. So if you did the readings, and I suspect you all did, of course, and even if you didn't, if you were paying attention in class, you should have a good idea of which passages I will ask you. Again, I will give you a lot of selection. So I might give you, say, something like 10 passages and ask you to comment on 5 of them. Okay, so even if you didn't read all the texts, even if you weren't there every class, you should still be okay as long as you did most of the readings and were paying attention during the discussions we had. So without going into further detail, that's pretty much all I can say. I can also say something that was very useful to me when I was writing my comprehensive exams 10 years ago, is you probably know more than you think you do. Okay, we've been studying these writers for a few months now. We've been having some interesting conversations about them. We've been reviewing the terms in class. And so you know more than you think you do. Assuming, of course, you've been showing up to class and paying attention most of the time. Okay, oh, we have 12 people who have joined. All right, welcome to all of you lurkers. I might have paid a couple of people to pretend to be part of the class so they can inflate the numbers to make this look less embarrassing. Oh, 13, okay. 14, okay. Miriam Kutop, I'm your biggest fan. Oh, thank you. Glad to hear it. Okay, it's always nice to have fans. Okay. So 15, wow, 15 people are watching. Okay, another question. Do we have to include examples for each definition? No, that would be asking a lot. If you want to, be my guest, but some of the questions it won't even be possible with some of the questions. So for example, if I asked you, I'm not going to ask this question, but if I asked you, what is an example of condensation from Freud's dream work, right? You'd have to make one up, right? So I'm not going to ask you for examples, but I will, when I ask you for the terms, I will ask you to give me a good definition and where it comes from. So like, who do we associate with the term, the unconscious, for example. And as long as it looks like you know what it is, even if your definition's a little awkward, that's okay. I just want to see, do you have a decent idea of what it is? But no, you won't have to give an example. Like, give me an example of the unconscious, right? It's going to be kind of hard to do. You could say, well, my unconscious is an example. Okay, so that's 2 questions so far. Okay, and we still have 15 people logged in, so that's a good sign. Okay, so just waiting for the next question. I'm going to have some water. Sharuk Matruk, what does Saussure mean when he says conventional? Okay, good question. So Saussure talks about language as being conventional, and I should say he talks about how signs in general are conventional, and language consists of linguistic signs. And the sign is conventional in that the meaning is agreed upon by convention. We as a society, as a culture, agree on what signs mean. So they don't mean something because they have a natural connection or a connection to the natural world. Words don't point to things, according to Saussure, but they mean because we agree on their meaning. That's what he means by conventional. Think about, how we have conventions, even in Kuwait, like those anime conventions, or the The events people go to dress up, right? They're convening, they're gathering, right? It's like a social gathering. So think of a social gathering as how signs work and how language works. So, but he means conventional as opposed to natural, because for a long time, going as far back as the ancient Greeks to Plato, many people argued that language was natural. It's rooted in nature. Language and signs point to things out there in the world, and that's how they mean. That's how they signify. And so Searle comes along and says, no, language just points to concepts, and they mean because we agree. How can it be both conventional and arbitrary? This was a question that bothered the most interesting linguist that we never, or sorry, the most interesting linguist nobody's heard of, Emile Benveniste. He wrote a paper in the 1940s asking this question, and he thought Saussure got it wrong. He said, well, how can language be conventional and arbitrary? Or how can the linguistic sign be conventional and arbitrary? But the thing is, though, because it is arbitrary, because it is random, it's not found in nature, we must agree on its meaning. So it's one of these paradoxes. It's because it's arbitrary, it has to be conventional. Otherwise, communication would break down. We wouldn't be able to communicate. So that's something, you're not the first person to ask that question, Sharuk. And if you're curious, you can read Benveniste's essay. It's a pretty short one. But that's, I think that comes from a misreading of Saussure. Saussure, if you go back and read him, he says it is conventional precisely because it's arbitrary. If it weren't arbitrary, we wouldn't have to worry about social consensus. It would just mean, language would signify because it's natural, it's found in nature. Okay, so far some good questions. Okay, so, I got 2 thumbs up, that's great. Just gonna make sure my door's closed. I'll give you a quick tour of my office. There's a calendar from Russia that was given to me by my neighbor Andrei Zavali. I went there in the summer, and I actually met Andrei in St. Petersburg. We had dinner together, and it was a very nice time. So that's a souvenir for me. And behind me here, some of you might recognize that, the Vanity of Human Wishes. It's backwards than the image. Do we need to know the meanings of diachronic and synchronic? Okay, Salwa, I see your question too. I'll get to that in 1 second. So Sharuk, do we need to know the distinction between diachronic and synchronic? That is not a question I have on the midterm, so you don't need to know it, but it's good to know. So diachronic just means through time, it's historical. Synchronic means at the present time. Oh, we have an out-of-class guest. Salwa A, what do we need to know about power knowledge? I'm not going to ask you this. This comes from Foucault. Just know, this is something that will pop up again when we get to post-colonial theory. Just know that for Foucault, discourse and knowledge and power are all connected together. According to Foucault, there's no discourse, there's no knowledge without power, and there is no power without knowledge. So that's pretty much all you need to know for now, but I'm not going to ask you that on this midterm. Okay, show us your dictionary. Okay, I have a question here. That's the... Okay. My hands are full right now, but maybe later I'll open it up for you. That's the physical copy of the Oxford English Dictionary. It has every word in the English language, and it is a marvel of scholarship. And I do use it sometimes, but now, of course, you can get an electronic version. In fact, I subscribe to the electronic version myself, so it's easier that way. So cool, yeah, thank you. You're always, by the way, if you want to take a closer look at this one here, it's a pretty big book. It's a little dangerous if you're not careful. You're always welcome to pop by and have a look at it. It's a marvelous document. So if you're ever bored, or if you ever need some inspiration, maybe. Okay, Farah AIQ, is there extra credit questions on the midterm? Okay, and Sharuk is asking another good question. I'll get to that in a moment. Okay, Farah, yes, I might have one or two bonus questions on the midterm. They'll be probably a little sillier than the other ones, but I always like to have one or two questions like that. So if you were hoping for a bonus question, you will, your wish will be granted. Okay, the other question was, are we going to be asked to draw connections between the theorists? Let me just close this here. No, I haven't. I don't think we have time for that right now. We only have an hour and change for the midterm. So it's actually pretty basic, this midterm, I think. If you want to mention some connections, that'd be great. But I might ask you like on the final or at some other point. But for this one, there's no question that I'll ask you to make connections. But of course, you're always welcome to. Just going to grab some water here. I'm just curious, can everyone hear me okay? Am I talking too fast? I've got 7 likes. That's the most likes I've ever had in my life, so I think that's a good sign. How about the objections to Saussure and Marx? What about the objections to Saussure and Marx? What do you, I'm curious to know what you mean by that. Okay, great, loud and clear, okay. Okay, while Sharuk is modifying or rephrasing her question for me, do we need to know, Bahja asks, do we need to know anything about commodification? It's great to know what it is, but we didn't really talk about it, and so no, I won't ask you about that. It is an important concept from Marxism, and it might come up when we talk about postmodernism, but I'm not going to ask you tomorrow about that. 9 likes. Okay, we're almost in the double digits of likes. So let's see if we can cross that threshold. Okay, let's see. Anything else I can show you guys? Oh, 10 likes. Okay. I should show this to my... Oh, 11. Okay, I should show this to my chair. Dr. David. Okay, I'm just going to walk around while I'm waiting for more questions. 12 likes. Okay. All right, let's see. Is there anything else I can show you? Oh, for the Oxford English Dictionary I just showed you. Here we go. Okay, Saussure, okay. So I got a couple of messages in a row, so Sharuk, I'll start with yours. Saussure, like the objections are onomatopoeia and interjections, and then they were objections to Marxist theory like capitalism. Oh, I see. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay, I'm getting a lot of questions in a row. Okay. So, Sharuk, no, you don't have to worry about the objections to Saussure or to Marx or Marxism, although it's a good thing to know that someone like Althusser, who came after Marx and was heavily influenced by Marx, tried to answer the sort of the questions that Marxism, classical Marxism, didn't answer. I'm not going to ask you about that, but if you see a passage from Althusser and you want to mention that, you know, one thing Althusser tried to do was try to explain the gaps in Marx or how ideology works, because it's something Marx never really talked about. He never described how ideology works. So that's where someone like Althusser comes in. Okay, let's see, what else do we have? So Miriam asks, did I get this correctly? One of the characteristics of an author, according to Foucault, is that when a writer gets punished for their work, they become an author. It's kind of a funny way to put it, but you're very close. One thing that Foucault says in What is an Author is that our concept of an author, you know, capital A author, it changes depending on the culture, the time, and the place. And he gives examples of how 1,000 years ago, in literature, we didn't really care about authors. The author function was different than it is in our culture now, where we care a lot about who wrote stuff. Not just the person who wrote it, but their function as the creator of the text. 1,000 years ago, the person who wrote Beowulf Down himself, or maybe herself, didn't really care that much about taking credit for it or anything like that. But what he means is, Foucault means is that he thinks it's not a coincidence that is starting our concept of literary authorship especially changes in the 18th century to what we have now, and this is also the same time we have the rise of capitalism and the rise of, or the copyright laws. Okay, so people could get punished either for infringing on people's intellectual property or for, pissing off the wrong person, right? So he's just saying that in our current time and place, and he's writing in the 1960s, but not much has changed since then in this respect, that when it comes to literary authorship, it's not a coincidence that when that started changing, at the same time we also had the changes in the economic system and the legal system. So in other words, you could say that our concept of the author, when it comes to literature especially, is something that wouldn't happen if we didn't live in the system we have now, if we didn't have the copyright laws, for example. I hope that answers your question. Ghadir, why do you like Marx? Oh, that's a interesting question. I'm not sure if I like Marx. I think Marx is very important. And it's not because I like him or I don't like him. What I like isn't relevant, to be perfectly honest. But Marx is one of the, along with Freud, one of the most important thinkers of the last couple of 100 years. And he went on to influence, or his ideas went on to influence, pretty much every other ism we have come across and will come across. So we've already seen the influence of Marx on someone like Althusser, and we will see him again, or Marx, again, when we get to post-colonialism and postmodernism, even deconstruction. He pretty much, and feminism too, by the way. We made a couple of connections with de Beauvoir, who we read just before I think last week we read her. You can see the connections between sort of a basic feminist theory and Marxist theory. So you like it or not, you can't really get away from him. He is a very important thinker. Okay, so I have two other questions. One from Shrouk about Althusser. I'll get back to that one. Bahja asks, are we going to have questions about Lacan in the exam? Okay, it's a good question. It's a fair one. I'm going to put your mind at ease and tell you that if there's a question about Lacan on the exam, I'm just going to ask you to tell me who he is. Okay, I'm not going to ask you what does he mean by the mirror stage, or what is the agency of the lit and the unconscious about, or what does he mean by the symbolic realm, or anything like that. If I do ask you anything about him, it'll be just tell me who he is. That's all it is. Okay, so don't worry about Lacan. Okay, to go back to Shrouk's question, can you please explain hegemony in relation to Althusser? Okay, so hegemony is an important concept that we get from Marxist. Yes, Lacan is the French Freud. Okay. So hegemony is, think of hegemony as soft power, ruling without using violent or coercive means. Okay, so people after Marx, including Gramsci, whom we didn't read, Antonio Gramsci and Althusser, they were wondering how is it that the dominant class, they exercise their power without using violence. Of course, they have, police and military and all of that, but it's a lot more complex. That's not the only way they do it. So the answer is the hegemony is just essentially soft power ruling without resorting to violence or force. Okay, and so how do they do that? Well, Althusser tells us through ideology, through ideological state apparatuses. So hegemony and ideology are connected. Okay, I had a few questions in a row, so I'm gonna just take a quick breather. Just want to check what time it is. Okay. I promised another live stream on Instagram at 6:45. Oh, a very bad connection. At 6:45. So we have about 15 minutes left here. Okay. Miriam asks, are Lacan, Benveniste, and Foucault considered to be post-structuralists? I'm not sure about Benveniste, although certainly Lacan and Foucault, yes. Now, we haven't talked about what post-structuralism is yet, so don't worry about that. But it is something we will talk about after the midterm when we look at Derrida. But Lacan and if you're curious, yeah, Lacan and Foucault are definitely post-structuralists, and in some ways you can make the case that Lacan, or sorry, not Lacan, Benveniste is also based on the essay we read. Okay. I'm curious about one thing, by the way. Are you guys, I'm not sure how many of you are on your phones or on your laptops, but can you post questions or comments on your phone, or do you have to be on your laptop? I'm curious about that. Okay, Sharuk asks, what is the unconscious? Okay, this is Freud's single most important contribution to Western thought. It's an idea that we all take for granted. The unconscious is sort of in our unconscious. Freud comes along. Okay, Freud comes along and says, because for a long time we thought, okay, Farah says, I'm using my phone and I can post comments. Okay, great. I wasn't sure you could do that. Okay. The unconscious, yes, we talk about people being conscious and unconscious, of course. So unconscious, like when you're asleep or when you're knocked out, if you go have surgery and they give you anesthetic to fall asleep, you're unconscious, right? But we are talking about the unconscious. Okay, so the unconscious, this part of your mind that you're not aware of, okay, you're not conscious of your unconscious. And so Freud comes along and says, you think you know yourself, you think you know where your sense of self comes from and your likes and dislikes and all that. Well, let me tell you that there's this thing below the surface, and that is what determines really who you are, your quirks, and especially why people had certain mental issues and things like that, why they're attracted to people. We often don't know why that is. And according to Freud, a lot of this occurs in the unconscious. And that's why dreams are so important to him, because he thought dreams are the sort of the gateway to the unconscious. That's the only way we can really access someone's unconscious. But the important idea there is that for the first time, 100 years ago, Freud comes along and says that there's so much more at work below the surface when it comes to us, our sense of self, and pretty much everything. Okay, it's good to see that some of you are on your mobile devices and are able to comment, so I wasn't sure you could do that, so that's good to know. Okay, I'm up to 16 likes now. It's pretty good. Okay, there's about 8 people still here. I wonder how many of them are lurkers. It's usually how it is. Okay, I will have some water while I'm waiting for the next question. What do we need to know about repression? I'm not going to ask you about that. So again, you don't need to know anything about it. Yeah. Condensation, displacement, repression. Again, if you want to know these things, great. I'm not going to ask you about them. But it's a good idea to know what the unconscious is and why the concept of an unconscious is so important. Salwa asks, could you please go over the idea of the eternal feminine? Okay, good question. So the eternal feminine is this idea that comes from Simone de Beauvoir. She's the last writer we read before our review session. And that comes from her seminal book, The Second Sex, which was published in 1949. And so in it, she contrasts our everyday experience of women in society with this myth in society of the eternal feminine. Okay, so many of you are women, and we've all known other women, and everyone's different, right? We're all individuals. We have our different likes and dislikes, and so on. But she says in patriarchal societies, and we live in a patriarchal society, a male-dominated society, there is this myth of the eternal feminine, this sort of timeless construct of femininity that all women sort of follow. So, for instance, and the example she gives is the feminine mystique or mysteriousness. Like, aren't women weird? Like, they're so inscrutable, no one can figure them out, right? And most women you meet are pretty normal people, right? But we have this idea in our culture, and when I say our culture, Kuwait, U.S., Canada, doesn't matter. It's all there. You see it in movies all the time, that women are these weird, mysterious creatures nobody can figure out. And this is something that goes back, what's her name? De Beauvoir says, goes back as far back as we have records. I mean, to the ancient Greeks, for example, they had jokes about how, all women are like this. They're all mysterious, right? So that's definitely part of it. You could also tie it into other ideas, like all women are irrational, or all women at all times want children, right? So this myth of what women are in all times and places, that's the eternal feminine, which she contrasts with our actual experience. Farah asks, is the format of the midterm short answers and essay questions? Yeah, it'll be 2 parts. The first part will be some definitions, so some of the terms we've been going through, and if I haven't posted a term on Moodle, by the way, I'm not going to ask you, okay? Okay, I'm getting a couple of more questions, so I'll get to those in a moment. So yeah, so the first part will be some definitions, okay, and these are terms we've not only talked about, but I've posted on Moodle. And the second half will be some passage identification, and so some of the important passages, the important statements we've discussed, and I'll ask you where they come from, but more importantly, why are these passages important? And these are among the most important things we've read in the class, the most important statements we've read in the class. So I'm not going to expect you to know some marginal thing that de Beauvoir said, but something about the eternal feminine, for example, I might ask you. Okay, let's see. What are the characteristics of the author function, and what is Foucault's definition of genealogy? Don't worry about genealogy. It's something that Foucault has a hard time defining himself in an essay that we didn't read. But as far as the author function goes, just know that in What is an Author, Foucault doesn't actually define an author, but he talks about how the author as a construct works in different times and places, in different discourses, right? So in scientific discourse, literary discourse, and so on. So just know that it works differently in different times and places, and the author function can also serve as as a way of classifying or organizing documents, for instance, right? So this center around which meaning is constructed and that texts are that are placed, okay? Another thing just to keep in mind with Foucault is, I'm not going to ask you genealogy, but he is a historian of the present as opposed to a historian of the past. So that's one thing he liked to say about himself. Another question, not related to the test. Okay, I love unrelated questions. Who's your favorite theorist so far? That's a good question. It's a little hard to say because we haven't read everyone we are going to read, and in some cases we've read only a few pages. I mean, even Marx, we only read a few pages from him. I would say, though, I think I quite like Saussure. I have an interest in language and linguistics. I'm an amateur linguist, and so I find that stuff really interesting. I was rereading some of his statements today. So he's up there for me, and I would say Marx, when he's talking about things like alienation and ideology, even though other people expand on it, this idea of ideology, this concept of ideology is so important and interesting. And if you watch the video I posted with Slavoj Žižek talking about ideology, how it's like this guy who puts on sunglasses in a movie he talks about can kind of see through ideology with them. That's a really interesting and kind of funny video to watch. So I would say probably a toss-up between those two. But after the break, after the midterm, we'll look at some other authors. Like Derrida I quite like. A lot of people don't like him, but I do. There's so many to choose from, but if I had to pick one, I'd say Marx or Saussure. Okay, we have I have 18 likes. We're almost at 20. Let's see if we can get there. I'm wondering, it's 6:42, and I have a live stream on Instagram coming up. So maybe time for one more question before I go there. I just want to make sure that people who couldn't log on to YouTube for some reason have a chance to ask questions there. I downloaded Instagram last night for the first time. I've had an account for over a year, but I never use it. And for those, if you're wondering, there won't be anything juicy there. There won't be any pictures or anything like that. It's a kind of a blank account. I never use it. So, but I thought it might be fun to use. Shema asks, I have a question. What do we need to know? What do we need to know about the history of sexuality for the exam? Okay. Okay, and a question from Sharuk. Okay, so I'll answer Shema's first. What do we need to know about the history of sexuality? So, excuse me, good question. Just know that in the history of sexuality, what Foucault tries to do is, he does a few things, but he tries to, remember, he's a historian of the present, so he wants to find out where do our ideas about things related to sexuality come from. They all have a history, right? These ideas that we think are natural, they all have a history. So he wants to find out where, for example, or why is it that we classify people in certain ways in terms of like their sexuality. And he argues that things like the homosexual, as opposed to a person who happened to do homosexual things, was invented in the 19th century. Because until then, your sexuality didn't define you. You just did some stuff, you know, for fun. But he said in the 19th century, he says that's kind of when these identities were formed, right? So, and he has that famous passage about the sodomite was an aberration, the homosexual was an identity. Okay, so so just know that with discourse, and he's talking, of course, about the discourse of sexuality. He talks about other discourses in other places, but the discourse, how discourse shapes identity and subjects. Because when you point to something, when you have a discourse about something and you point to it, and you know that creates subjects. Okay. Do we? Okay. Oh. There was a message from a former student, Bashir, that was retracted. I hope she adds it again. Sharuk asks, do we need to know Benjamin and the aura? You don't need to know much about Benjamin. He's not the most important or interesting theorist we've looked at. If you can give me a definition of what the aura is, that should be enough. And the aura, remember, is, according to Benjamin, he's talking about the age of mechanical reproduction. For the first time in history, in his days, in the 1930s, we had film and we had things we can reproduce mechanically, right? Whether it's film or like even this thing here. Okay, just to give you a silly example, this is a souvenir from Iraq, the Line of Babylon, and I'm pretty sure this wasn't handmade. So this is something that you can make a million of these in a factory, no problem, right? So this has no aura because there's no original, there's a million of them. But 1,000 years ago, because there would have been only one of them, one actual, it had an aura, like it had a glow around it. But in this age, because of mechanical reproduction, the aura is lost. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Benjamin's kind of ambivalent about it. On the one hand, aura might be a good thing. But on the other hand, he also thought that mechanical reproduction gives unparalleled access to this stuff. So think of the Mona Lisa, for instance. Now we can, if you want to look at it right now, you can do that and you can print it out and put it on your wall. Or you can buy a cheap reproduction from the store and put it on your wall. But up until, 80 years ago, the only way you could see it is if you actually went to see the real thing, and there's only one of them, right? Now, is Benjamin right about this? That's another matter. You won't have to know this for the exam, but some people, like one of my colleagues, thought Benjamin was completely wrong about the aura, because I think he has a point. I mean, people line up to go see the Mona Lisa now in Paris, right? They want to see the original one. Off-topic question: what bands do you listen to? That's a funny question. I wasn't expecting, and I'm wondering why it came up now. But if you are, you know what? I'll let you guys guess. I think one of you knows some of the bands I listen to, but let's see if you can maybe do a semiotic analysis or something, or you know, analyze my unconscious and see what bands, what kind of music I listen to. Okay, maybe time for one more question. And then I need to migrate to Instagram. And then maybe I'll come back here if I see there's nobody there. Oasis. It's not a bad guess. I remember listening to, what was their big album that came out in the 90s? I remember when it came out, and like, what's the story, Morning Glory, or something like that. They're okay, but I wouldn't say I listen to them, but it's nice when I hear them. I think Omar knows the answer to that question, by the way. I'm not sure if he's listening right now. All right. Opeth, that's a very good guess. Okay. I guess it's after 6 p.m., so we're allowed to be silly. Okay, so Opeth, that's a good guess. I do listen to them sometimes, but they're not my favorite band. But you're thinking in the right ballpark. Okay, so Bashire rewrote her comment. Good evening. It's nice to see you on YouTube. I'm not in your English 415 class. However, I enjoy listening to your explanations. Oh, that's great. So I am performing a public service as well. So it's always nice to see former students pop in. Okay, and of course, if you have nothing to do at 2 p.m. on Sunday and Thursday, Bashire, you're always welcome to join us. Ghadir asks, do you think there is similarities between you and Ted Mosby? It's interesting you say that, because a few years ago, when I was clean shaven, people said that too. In fact, one of my former students I had about 6 or 7 years ago said, "Oh, do you watch How I Met Your Mother?" And I said, "No, is that the show with, what's his name, Barney Stinson, Neil Patrick Harris?" And so I started watching it, and some people had said, "Yeah, you remind me of Ted Mosby." I'm not sure why, because he has hair and I have a beard. So there's some commotion outside. Anyway, so I'm not sure where that comes from. So if you can explain that, I'd be happy to hear that. But yeah, you're certainly not the first person, Ghadir, to say that. Salwa A, Cannibal Corpse, Morbid Angel, not those two bands, but yeah, you're thinking in the right ballpark. Alanud, thank you for this online lecture. Great, I'm glad you found it helpful. That was the whole point. I can't even try to imagine you without a beard, says Miriam. You know what? Now I can't either, because I've had a beard for about 3 years. Actually, almost 3 years now. I was clean shaven for a long time, or I had maybe just some stubble. But yeah, I'm having a hard time imagining it too. When I look at old pictures, shave your beard if we all get A's. Wow, okay, you got a deal. Okay, maybe time for one more question before I go to Instagram. And if you guys want to join me there, my handle, I think that's what you call it, is Dr. Arby, Dr. period Arby, A-R-B-Y. Some of you already added me. So if I don't get any questions in the next few seconds, still your biggest fan? Okay, thank you. Okay, glad to hear. It's always nice to have fans. Okay. Okay, thanks for this, Prof. It really helped. Okay, you're welcome, Shruk. I'm glad it helped. I wasn't just doing this for fun, although it was a lot of fun, but I'm glad you found it helpful. And thanks for letting us know how to post comments, because I wasn't sure how to get around that. Okay, all right, so wow, it's been 50 minutes 50 minutes. So we're going into overtime. I'm going to go to Instagram now. So if you guys want to join me there, hopefully there'll be some people waiting there. If not, I will see you guys tomorrow. And again, don't think of this as a midterm or a great lecture. Thanks, Prof. Yeah, you're welcome, Shema. Think of this more as an opportunity to show me what you know, or as that alien in Rick and Morty says, show me what you got, right? That's really what this is all about. I'm not here punishing you or anything like that. I just want to see if you can show me what you know. Okay, so I'm going to go to Instagram now. Okay, so see you guys there or see you tomorrow.